took up this wonderful space in Colaba and really transformed downtown Colaba into an art district. Their practice ranges from exhibiting contemporary art to also historic material, and they have traveled all over the world exhibiting and really captivating Indian contemporary art to a worldwide audience. Over to Mortimer.
Thank you, Farah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to Decode this weekend, and for joining us for this session. This is the kickoff for the discourse sessions, and for the first one, the organisers thought it would be interesting to think about public art as it stands in contemporary India. And for that, we have assembled three really interesting panelists, each whom really has been at the forefront of interventions within public spaces for a number of years now, and each of whom brings a very particular skill set to the field. We thought it would be interesting to have the session run such that each of our panelists would first present some of their recent projects, older projects, as they wish, and we'd give each about 10 minutes or so. We've got some visuals for each of them, and then we would have a little panel discussion, followed by which we'd throw it open for Q&A, and then let everyone go off for lunch by about 1:30. So just to introduce our panelists one by one, we're going to start with Mr. Vijay Churaria, Managing Director of Crest Venture Limited, a non-banking finance company, who has served as an independent director on the board of several prominent companies and executive committee of Bombay Stock Exchange. He has, beyond his own extraordinary business accomplishments, been a great friend to the arts over the last at least dozen years, and increasingly has become involved with public art projects. In his own capacity, down in Chennai, as of the last couple of years, he has really opened up what public art can mean within the context of mall spaces, first with Phoenix City Mall, and most recently Palladium. And this is in concert with his own philanthropic and Sunita, his wife's philanthropic initiatives, both with Artsy, which is the kind of umbrella organisation which brings together a lot of these initiatives, but also help towards activities such as the Mumbai Art Room, and also background support for and being patrons for the Kochi Muziris Biennial. After Vijay, we're going to have a presentation by Abhay Narayan Lamba, who's of course, extraordinarily well-known heritage architect, who has worked both on a number of historical sites, including Buddhist monuments in Ladakh, the Nainital Raj Bhavan, the Viceregal Lodge in Shimla, and medieval monuments in Hampi. In Mumbai, Abhay has been involved with immensely important restoration projects, including Municipal Head Office, the University Convocation Hall, Crawford Market, the Old Secretariat, Sir J.J. School of Art, Bombay High Court, Asiatic Library, and most recently, of course, the Royal Opera House. Abhay's firm has won 9 UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards, and she has been shortlisted amongst the 20 most prominent women in architecture for the Art Vision Prize in 2016. Lastly, we're going to hear from Peter Nagy. Peter began his gallery career in New York in the 1980s, and then moved to India in the early 90s, opening Nature Mort, New Delhi in 1997. The gallery is now synonymous with a generation of artists who have become perhaps the most influential in terms of becoming ambassadors for Indian contemporary art within the global art discourse. More recently, Peter has been involved with public art in the form of the Nahaga Fort in Jaipur, which, although I haven't been, I think all of us have been have seen images, has transformed the possibilities of bringing contemporary art within a conversation of heritage architecture, and what that can do in terms of engaging audiences that may not be used to contemporary art, and how that can transform people's relationship to the art. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Vijay to come up and present. So we have a little presentation set up for you. If I can ask you to come sit here, then it's just a question of sort of, yeah, down, but I can help you. Vijay, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm in company of Peter and Abha here, so I'm just going to give a little brief introduction to people refer to us as art collectors. But for me and Sunita, both of us, it's never been about collecting. It's always been about deeply engaging with the entire art world and the artists and the subject of art itself. And we've been really fortunate because if you really think about it, that we've interacted with such amazing artists, gallerists, museum directors, exhibition designers, amazing architects. So this has truly, truly enriched our lives. Imagine meeting all these fantastic creative minds. So in that sense, art, architecture, and design for me merge as one. And very often when I am doing a project, there's a lot of cross-referencing that happens between these various subjects. For example, before I go ahead with the presentation, when I was doing a luxury mall which just opened up a month back, and when we thought of the facade of the mall, there was a Chanel bag which has got tufting. So you bring in a luxury product like Chanel, you bring the tufting into it, and you look at the facade of a mall and say, how can I incorporate that and give it that feel? You take it forward, you see in the Sistine Chapel, and you see in the drawings on the Sistine Chapel, why can't I bring projection on these walls instead of putting gold foil and chandeliers, and yet bring art into space, and yet make it contemporary, but yet get inspiration from these kind of objects. You can keep thinking of various such initiatives. Another very recent one we did was a bar, and I thought of this artist called Ligia Pei, and she works with these strings. Why can't I take that, a Kanjivaram print, the weaving, and create a ceiling which sort of uses these strings and yet brings Indian craft, Kanjivaram, into these spaces. So this is just a quick background into how various thoughts go into looking at things and having cross-reference and having had the opportunity to meet all these fabulous people from the art world. Let me start by, I don't know why this is not there, but anyway, this is a mall I was building way back in 2009, 1 million square feet spread across typical consumption space. It's a mixed-use development, and you have residences on top of the mall, which is 25 meters elevated, and the residences, the top of the mall was where all the features of the facilities of the residence remained, but down was the mall. And there was a small boutique hotel, 26-room hotel, and the second phase of this was the luxury mall. So anyway, so this, sorry about that. Should I use this or use this? So this was the mall which was completed. This is on top of the mall, another image.
Do control N.
It doesn't matter, I think we should just move on. So this, I think this image is an important image for me because when the mall was nearing completion, one of the site visits when I was walking by, I suddenly saw these large open spaces in the mall. And the immediate reaction when I saw these spaces was, what can we do with it? And then this image flashed in my mind. This is two large Botero sculptures sitting in the Time Warner building in New York. I was in the lobby, and I said, why can't we bring public art into these spaces? Because these malls are going to be typical spaces where you have 30, 40,000 visitors coming every day. Why can't we let them interact with these spaces? So there are certain images which remain in your mind, and then these flash back when you're doing projects, and that's where the journey started. So we had this, an Artsy is a personal initiative where we got a lot of support from the art world. And this is, for example, one of the sculptures which Ravindra Reddy had loaned to us. So what was important at this point when we decided to bring an art program, we thought of this whole program as running a museum. So we worked with a young curator, that time Diana Campbell, who's today gone out to become a prominent curator, and we got an installer who was a specialist in production called Ev Lemesli, who runs a space called What About Art. We put a whole team together, and we got a lot of support from various galleries and artists as well, who came to us, and that's where we thought, what can we do? We can acquire some works, but not all works. So we got into loans. We created loan forms, created insurance, created security to take care of all these artworks. That's how the whole journey started. So we had a lot of support, like this was a loan from Sharon Apparao's gallery. That's a Talur work, thanks to Shirin. So this is a robo which was given to us by TNT, and the interesting story in this was on loan to us, but this got so popular because Robo is a very famous movie in South India by Rajnikant, and people used to say, I'll meet you by the Robo. So we ended up acquiring this work. So sometimes a work signifies the importance of the space, not necessarily the other way around. These are Sunil Gaude's bulbs. And that's a desk designed by Rusha Shroff. He just come in that time from his training with Zaha Hadid. So we engaged him to design the desk. This is another work, Gigi Scaria. Anjum Singh was a young artist. So this was commissioned. I think we spent more money on the vitrine than on the work itself. And that's TV Santosh. And you see back, there's Pablo's photographs. That's a Manish Naik. Just to give you an idea that there are lots of works. This is outside the cafe, the food courts, there's Arun Kumar works. So the escalators also became another important space for us because it's movement. So we created stuff like this is Akash Nilani's work, which was part of the escalator. This is some outside spaces that you had Philip Murphy, an English artist whom we got work done from. And what was important at this point is that we realized that we need to bring sculptures, installations, and why not video art? So there were places we could dim the lights, like outside of an elevator. And then we got various video arts. This video art program rotates every 6 months. And we've had William Kentridge, Jennifer Steinkem, Natalie Joberg, lots of international artists who've given us works. And it's interesting because when people walk by, they engage with it. That's a gallery. So again, you can't put paintings outside the mall that clash with shop windows, but there are galleries that lead out to parking lots, etc. So that's where the photographs came in. So Pablo's nearly 150 works have been in the mall, and this is the film craft work that he's got. This is a recent Shilpa Gupta shadow work, which is was playing in Fikka and Bhaudaji Lal. And we had another performance art by Anandita. So I think this was the phase one where the project was ready. We suddenly realized there's an opportunity, so we started doing that. This is the second mall that just got inaugurated a month back. Here we had the opportunity to think from art, architecture, and design all together. And this is the facade I was talking of. When we were working on this, we thought, what is it that we can do? What's the element that can go behind? That's a zinc material, it's very tactile. You see, it goes from 2D to 3D. But this was the kind of thought process that went behind it. So there was an object like a Chanel bag, tufting, which is coming from there. And from there, we translated into a facade of a mall. And you can light it and it can create shadows. And it was quite beautiful that we could think of a simple object like tufting and Chanel bag and bring it into a mall. Then we thought of the entrance to the mall. Typically, when you walk in, there's security machines and the woman has to go through this frisking area, which has got these dirty curtains. Again, we had inspiration from Richard Serra, who's an artist. And why can't we create something like that? And I worked with the architect and we said, let's create a product that becomes an artwork on its own. And yet you can pass by without anyone viewing you and not touching these curtains. And the frisking or the security becomes more a pleasure than a problem that you're trying to go through these kind of security machines, because you look at the best hotels and you still got those horrible security machines and all that. So this is the inspiration from Richard Serra, and we achieved it. And it looks quite stunning, and the people just have to walk through and without any kind of frisking or anything that's required. If frisking is required, there's another space without touching any kind of curtains or anything else. This was another mirrored ceiling that we had, and this is again Sheesh Mahal inspired movement. I'm just going to rush through because I think we don't want to. This is beyond the mirrored ceiling was an atrium, and we thought, what can we do in the atrium? And you think of James Turrell, who does these fantastic light spaces with void in the center. Can we do projection on these ceilings and create something like the Sistine Chapel? So that's how the whole conversation between Sistine Chapel, James Turrell, and projection, and it's a platform that's got created, and there's so many artists who can engage with this platform, and over the years keep curating for this kind of thing. So it's never static, it's not one, it can keep changing. So this is something we've got going. It's about Chennai, and again, ceiling projections that happen. I'll quickly close out with this design hotel that we built. It's a part of the project, and we had a small boutique hotel to do, and this was a 26-room hotel. So instead of just doing a simple hotel or the typical one, we said, okay, here was the intervention where we thought of 4 types of architecture, which is maximalism, minimalism, effect, and form. They're contemporary architecture, but yet we wanted to keep it Indian. So there should be some element of Chennai or India in that. And this is the maximalism room. So that's the corridor. That's the room. If you see the floor, it's got the column print, which is what happens with India in the Chennai down south. This is the maximalism room. This is the minimalism room in Chennai. You can't see, the image is not clear here, but you've got red floor, like red oxide flooring. This is the form room. So if you go to temple, the temple pillars in one line, and instead of looking at them, we said, let's create something similar to that. So corridors have the form, and the room had its own form. This is the effect room. So it was a la Jean Nouvel inspired, so you had effect over there, but then you use a tanjore, you lenticular it, and that's another effect that you try creating. This is the cafe, and this is the bar I was talking about. If you see, that's on the right side, that's Ligia Pep, who does these strings, and from there the inspiration comes, and you look at the weave pattern, and the entire ceiling, which had various beams coming down, we were able to create it into something like this, where it looks like a loom on the top. And it's interesting because it's an artist-inspired work that created something to do with an interior project. That's it. I think this is just one last. There's a club which we were inspired again by Gothic architecture, and you instead of, when we use waste wood, instead of creating corridors, you again create something that gets inspired by art, architecture, and design. I think that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Vijay. That was really inspiring, and I hope that those of you who haven't seen these properties in Chennai will have an opportunity to do that soon. And what I'd like everyone to do is just hold questions. If you have questions for any of our panelists, just hold them till the end when we can open it up for Q&A. So next we're going to invite Abha to talk to us about some of her recent projects.
Sorry, I'm just going to take 1 minute waiting for the right presentation.
That's fine.
I got the wrong one.
Yeah. Abha, over to you. Thanks so much.
Hi. What I'm going to talk about today is how architecture is really a very important aspect of the public realm. And when we talk about urban art, we talk about the identity of a city. You cannot disassociate it from public architecture. And that's why the problem in the last 70 odd years post-independence is that we've been so focused on the lowest common denominator for a democratic country and sort of an emerging country that we're still emerging after 70 years, that art and anything aesthetic is sort of pushed aside, and that's not considered important enough. So when you look at even great structures like this, because of rent control, because of the whole aspect of this pseudo-socialist behavior, you can't throw out a tenant, but then the onus of a building's repair is on the owner, who's obviously not getting anything. And we have this all across. So I think my journey with engagement with Bombay's urban issues really began sometime around 95. And by 98, a group of us formed the Horniman Circle Association, and we just looked at these beautiful buildings, which the Horniman Circle as an urban design element precedes Delhi's Connaught Place by half a century. So when you think of just the kind of scale, this was a business district as good as any, in comparison with anything in Europe at that time. And all we got was 6 lakh rupees in 98. And we thought, let's do something for it. You can spend 6 lakhs on bathroom tiles, but we managed to just look at the public realm, the facade, and just got rid of the clutter to be able to show how one building could look better for the city. Because a building doesn't, I believe that a building or a landmark building doesn't belong just to the owner or to the occupant, because it belongs and it impacts every citizen. Because every day when you're going to office and you pass by a building, it does affect you psychologically. If suddenly the building starts looking good, I'm sure you're going to have a better day than if you were passing by a horrible building. But what this did was we addressed the issue of signage, because that's something that's sort of visual pollution, and just got them to put signboards in a particular shape or a particular area. And what was really just a small initiative in 98 has then led to a kind of a domino effect of gentrification of the whole area. There's been no government money, not a penny of government money that's gone into this area. But eventually you've begun to see a difference of just a public engagement with buildings that start making a place better. I think the same happened with Kala Ghoda. 98, we were just a bunch of people invited for tea to Mr. Shahrukh Sabawala's house, office at the Tatas, which was the Bombay House. And he invited Shirin Barucha, his daughter Radhika Sabawala, Rahul Mehrotra, Sharda. No, Sharda wasn't there for that. There was Mr. Jamshed Kanga and myself over for tea. And he said, I hang my head in shame every time I pass by the Elphinstone College and I see my grandfather's bus looking down upon me, because the area is a mess. There are drug peddlers at night, and it's just a really sad, dilapidation, and it's just what's happened to this area. So it was the year 98, it was the end of 97, and we said, let's do one thing. Let's just count the number of gallery spaces or art spaces in the area. And we figured it was 1 lakh square foot. So we had no money, we had no assets. We just got together, I drew up little sketches of all these important buildings, and we put together a calendar of events of what was happening in the month of February in Bombay in these different events. I mean, Shirin's gallery and Jahangir Art Gallery or the Prince of Wales or NGMA. So all we did was put it down in under one list. And then a lot of other people joined in, Sharda Vivedi, Sangeeta Jindal, a whole lot. We used to meet at Wayside Inn Cafe for little brainstorming sessions. And what we did was just pick a 2-week event in the month of February, and we said we will go and ask the government only for one thing, is don't give us money, but just allow us to use this triangular parking lot. And what started as an idea to bring public art onto a common platform was what started the Kala Ghoda Festival. And what we managed to do was very small. It's not as big and massive, and which in a sense now it's maybe become too big for itself. It's sort of imploding with too much commercialization. But the idea was to just bring contemporary art to the common man. And that was really the core of the idea that we began with. So we got artists to exhibit on the footpaths. We got, for Samovar, did their first Paratha festival where they would make parathas, to like favorite paratha of Charles Correa or Sham Benegal's favorite paratha. So there was curation of food, there was curation of artworks. We got Ustad Zakir Hussain to perform with Ala Rakha at the parking lot, and all this was free. So the idea was use public spaces, use all the interstitial public spaces that are otherwise not used for art, and make sure that you are throwing people into that artwork because it's free and there's no ticketing. And what it did was, it got us no money obviously because everything is free, But over the years, what it did was create a lot of goodwill for us. So after the first festival, we got 5 lakh rupees from HSBC, and we got it matched by the Dorab Tata Foundation. So we got the Elphinstone College at the back. We had 10 lakhs to restore the facade, which is quite bizarre. But then we went to the government and said, Maharashtra government owns this building, you do nothing about it, so allow us, which is an NGO, to restore the facade and give it back to you. So there's really nothing, no obligation towards us, because to us that was the public realm of the building. And with 10 lakh rupees in 2001, we started with the restoration of the Elphinstone College and completed it purely using non-abrasive water misting techniques. So in a sense, training the Public Works Department engineers in how to deal with historic buildings, because till then they'd been using cement repairs instead of lime, and just basic things like wiring. I mean, all you needed to do was reroute it. It's been 20 years now since that project started, but what it did was at least begin the government on at least begin to acknowledge that heritage buildings were to be treated different from other buildings. And since then, obviously, it's grown. Art has taken various forms. There are laser shows, there are installations, there have been all sorts of festivals, art walks. But at the same time, one has to realize that an art festival also needs a canvas, and there's nothing better than a heritage precinct, whether it's Navalgarh Fort in Rajasthan or or even the Venice Biennale. It would not be the Venice Biennale if it were not for that fabulous setting. And that brings me to something like the Textile Museum in Bombay, which has been rotting away as a project. It's got the same scale as the Venice Art Biennale buildings, and we as citizens should really demand that we get this from the government when we have these beautiful buildings around. So what this does is really have art engage with architecture and recycle spaces in a sense that they're not normally visualized as. So why can't the steps of the Asiatic Library become an amphitheater for a musical event in the evening? Why can't the rear garden of David Sassoon Library host poetry readings, or why can't morning ragas be hosted on the terrace of the Jahangir Art Gallery? And then this sort of has led over the years to engaging with buildings like this, bit by bit, working on restoring them, to sometimes just removing all the layers of horrible paint that they've been subjected to, or the kind of clutter of steel cupboards that these spaces have been subjected to. And then if you get to reuse these spaces, why can't you have art events in public libraries after the library closes? So when we talk of recycling water, paper, electricity, we talk of recycling everything. Why can't we recycle historic buildings? Because that is perhaps one of the most rare and vulnerable aspects of the city that we have. So it's really about trying to remove, this ongoing battle, trying to remove visual clutter from areas such as DN Road. I mean, we got rid of the McDonald's signage after I made about 25 visits to McDonald's and sort of shamed them that, McDonald's in London, you barely see the M, in Rome, you barely see it, and here you've got such a big signboard. And they finally removed it, and we could actually say, oh my God, there are arches on Mahindra building. Right. And that has led to, it's been a long struggle, but, even with someone like Anaita Pandul filing a public interest litigation to remove this, because as a citizen, I demand that my city has low pollution levels when I'm breathing air. But what happens to how your visual senses are being assailed and assaulted every day with the kind of visual clutter? And I think that's something that we need to remember, and we need to, I actually popped a bottle of champagne the day this Blitz hoarding came down. But that begs the question, what do we do about public architecture when you have a situation like this? We need to declutter, defragment our cities, and if we see the whole city, why should the bylaws in a city like Bombay be one size fits all? How can Nariman Point have the same FSI and the same height restrictions and the same urban bylaws and development controls as Khotachiwadi or Banganga? And I think there our planners have failed us, and our politicians and administrators have failed us. When you know that Ballad Estate and Nariman Point are not the same, why do you treat them as same? So I rest my case.
Abha, thank you so much for that polemic, but brilliant polemic on the area of public art. Lastly, I'm going to ask Peter Nagy, to come and talk to us about a particular recent project that he's been involved with, where perhaps some of the positives of public-private partnerships can be seen, but we'll leave it to Peter to tell us more. Peter? So I've just...
What we do with the pictures?
We've got images if you want to scroll through them.
Okay. And these are all
From the website.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the larger sort of parameters of our project and not the specific works. So I'm not going to talk about the images on the slides, but all the images are from the sculpture park in Madhavendra Palace, Nahagar Fort in Jaipur, which has opened its first edition this past December 10th. And the show remains up until November 1st, and then we are already planning the second edition. Now, this is a public-private sort of collaborative. I mean, for myself, frankly, it's all a bit very just sort of, what's the word, selfish. You know, I've had a gallery in Delhi for 20 years now, and there were times we had a space in Calcutta and spaces in Berlin, and we do art fairs and all that, and I'm just really bored with the white box in general. Not that I don't love my gallery in Delhi and the shows we do in it, but you also, after 20 years, you get a sort of a facility of doing something at that scale and those parameters, and it does become quite easy. Mostly we do solo shows at the gallery, and things like that. So for me, it's about just wanting to put contemporary art into different types of spaces where we're not used to seeing it. And the idea of using forts for large-scale sculpture goes back to about 2000 when I was working on a defunct festival in Jaipur called the Virasit Festival that was a sort of citywide multiple arts platform. And we were doing exhibitions in temples, sort of site-specific installation projects in temples. We were doing more conventional shows at the Jawahar Kala Kendra. And at that time I had the idea, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could put large-scale sculptures into a place such as the Amber Fort. Unfortunately, that festival sort of fizzled out. It sort of became the Jaipur Lit Fest, but the people that were running it didn't have the vision or the wherewithal to take something of that scale on. So we can sort of jump ahead almost 20 years, and really this came about through, the initiative of the Rajasthan state government, and specifically the CM Vasundhara Raje, who someone whispered in her ear that, that Jaipur is seen as a cultural capital of Delhi. Most foreigners do visit Jaipur on their first trip to India. I certainly did. But that contemporary culture is also important to traditional culture, and that people travel for that as well. And I wasn't there, but it seemed the light bulb went on over her head. And part of this started with the renovation of Bikaner House in Delhi, which a lot of what I'm going to say, I think, really matches with what Abha was saying in terms of demanding. The citizens have to demand from their governments that things are done better in their museums and that the heritage buildings are better cared for. Anyway, so since independence, Bikaner House, you may know, is on the main circle, with Jaipur House turned into the National Gallery of Modern Art. Patiala House became the courts. Hyderabad House is used for official state dinners. Bikaner House became the state office, the state of Rajasthan offices in Delhi, and it was subsequently destroyed and turned into, in a period of 50 years. And through the vision of the chief minister, they basically emptied it out, moved the offices somewhere else in Delhi, I don't know where, and completely renovated the building in a very sensitive, beautiful restoration with the idea of turning it into a cultural hub. So now it is really Delhi's most active cultural venue. They do have rental galleries that artists or galleries can rent to do shows, but they do have some of their own programming, and they do multi-arts programming. There's concerts sponsored by embassies. There's all sorts of things. So because of the great success of Bikaner House, the next step really was going back to the Jawaharlal Kala Kendra in Jaipur, a beautiful building designed by Charles Correa, opened in about 93, 94, to be a museum of contemporary art. And unfortunately, what tends to be the pattern in the country is the building is built and then there's absolutely no
Curated.
Yeah, you know what I mean. No continuation in terms of funding for programming, staff, shows like that. So basically the building slowly again falls apart and gets disfigured to the sense that even at one point Correa disowned it and said they made such a mess of it, it's not my building anymore. So they brought in a group of advisors about what to do that, and then hired Pooja Sood, who has run Koj in Delhi for 20 years, to take on the job of renovating the building and establishing new programming and serious programming, but also reinvigorating the cafes and bringing in a Play Clan has a store there and things like that. So again, seeing it as a multi-use cultural center. Of course, the impetus and the focus being for contemporary art, but there's also a theater space and there's concert spaces and there's restaurants and all that, and now it's very lucky. So really, through a nexus of friends and people that were connected with the government, I was able to say, hey, I always wanted to put art, sculpture into a heritage building. And we went through a number of different possibilities, looking at different sites, and settled on the Madhavendra Palace, which is Nahagar Fort. If you don't know it, you probably know Amber, but if you follow that same ridge that Amber Fort is on back towards the city, it goes a little bit high, and then perched above there is Nahagar Fort, which overlooks the entire city. The fort itself dates from about 1760, but then in 1880 to 1890, the Maharaja built the Madhavendra Palace, which is in many ways a Victorian pre-planned palace, inserted into this to be a pleasure palace, basically for the monsoons, for him and his harem and the courtesans. It must have been quite a wild place. The site suited our purposes for a number of reasons, because I know we talk about public art. I wouldn't say our project is entirely public art. I would say it's a semi-public space in the sense that everyone has to pay an admission to enter the fort. I think that's 40 rupees for Indians and 200 for foreigners, so very reasonable. And then there never was any additional charge to enter the palace itself, which has been open as a monument for people to see, as an empty building. They are restoring the paintings throughout the building, so people really saw it just to appreciate the building and the architecture itself and the decorative arts within it. So now what we have used it is simply as a container to put sculpture in. It being a heritage building, we can't disfigure the building and don't want to disfigure the building in any ways. So it's really just sculpture that can be placed into rooms and left alone. The one thing we did do, the government did allow us to do, is put a bit of lighting, very simple track lights, which we did very sensitively with, so they're close to being invisible. The first one oh, I should be bored looking at that picture. Oh, this is work memory. But so the first one, we really confirmed the site in March, and we were looking at a December 10th opening because that had a significance for the chief minister. So I couldn't get into really commissioning works. We didn't have the budget or anything. So really what I had to do was go to artists that I was familiar with and works that already exist, and get things from studios that I knew already existed. We have 24 artists in the first exhibition. 7 are international, 17 Indian. We didn't have the budget or the time to bring artists there for Recce, so really almost all the artists saw it for the first time at the opening itself, which I think they were quite surprised, because we even had people that had lived their whole lives in Jaipur that had never been up to this palace. So it was sort of nice to reinvigorate a site like that for the locals. But again, this is a heritage structure that during the winter seasons does get about 5,000 to 6,000 people a day. And these are people that have absolutely no concept of contemporary art and certainly don't visit. I mean, you certainly get a cross range of people like that visiting the Baudaji Lad or the formerly Prince of Wales Museum. So we had security concerns. As I said, part of the advantage of many different rooms, indoor and outdoor spaces that could be used. Some could be closed off for security reasons. There was staff already on site, so there was already a staff of security guards there on site, which we've been able to add on to. And it took them some time to get used to it, but slowly they're getting comfortable with the pieces there, getting comfortable asking people not to touch the works. Some things have to be roped off. We knew it would be, a lot about selfies, and I picked a lot of work, such as this work by Sabod Gupta, which is a found cast iron stove with old Bartons piled up. So in many ways, this is a pretty tough piece that people could touch. Such also as his aluminum cast ambassador car. We were expecting people to lean against it, to take pictures and all that, but then they start putting their kids on top of it to climb over it. It's like, it's been a big learning curve. We've had to put stanchions around certain pieces. We did an elaborate system of signage, both in English and Hindi. So there's pretty large signage with each piece to explain, one paragraph to explain the work itself, and a second paragraph to explain the artist's practice in general. And I must say it's wonderful to see gangs of people, especially in front of the Hindi language things. Again, if we're talking, I think 5,000 to 6,000 people a day, I think if we just get 10% of those visitors actually paying attention to the signage and being, getting a little deeper into what is this object and what does it mean and why is it here, then we're doing our job. I mean, we're opening up doors and things like that. So as I said, this was a public and private collaboration in the sense that then we were able to start a foundation and raise all the money. Almost 99% of the money for the project itself came from Indian corporates, where we were able to tap into their pre-existing CSR, corporate social responsibility budgets, which they had to give. It was a long process of working with the government so that all the paperwork could be in place, so the money could just be transferred from the corporates, from their CSR budgets, to our project specifically. We didn't want it to go and disappear within a larger Rajasthan government organization, to our project specifically. So we hope that is a corpus which will continue to be able to grow, because certainly even some people that we approached the first time said, oh, I don't know what you're doing. Now they see it and they realize the value of it and the press that it gets and why they should be involved with it. So we have a 10-year agreement with the government of Rajasthan to use the palace, and we are now well into organizing edition number 2, which will open on December 8th or 9th. And we have the time to bring artists there to see it, to develop site-specific projects, hopefully working with local artisans and craftspeople to make things specific for, and they can pick certain rooms. We have 24 artists. We have 24 artists in this first edition, and I think 61 works. I'm hoping the second edition will be less artists, maybe just 12 or 15, but maybe 10 to 12 works by each artist. So using more spaces, just explore, but there's still many different types of spaces within. This first edition I had to take the easy way out, just for the simple fact that you're dealing with people that have no concept, the people in the government had no concept of what we were going to do, and they were quite trustworthy. So we had to make it easy for everybody, and now as things progress, we can get a little more complicated.
Peter, thank you so much. Maybe I'll ask you to sit on the couch, and maybe if I could ask Vijay and Abha also to join us over here. I'm conscious of the time, so I had a number of questions that I was going to ask separately, but I think I'm going to club them all together. Maybe ask each of you, Vijay, Abha, and Peter, to maybe just reflect on some of the ideas which I'm going to propose, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and let's see where we go from there. My first question to each of you was really just going to be about how, in each of your spheres of activity, the landscape within the context of India has changed, and your relationships with your particular projects. But I think I want to fold in also a couple of ideas which all of you have been speaking about continually. One is engagement with government at state and union level, how that has changed over the course of your careers, how your engagement with the idea of citizenship has changed. In other words, Abha proposed it and Peter continued the idea that if you want things to happen, you need to, citizens need to engage with their own communities to force those changes. I'd like to know how that has changed in your own spheres of activity over the last 18 to 20 years. And then lastly, this idea of recycling, which Abha has brought up in terms of spaces and how spaces can be used. I'm thinking of an exhibition which Peter did in, was it Golf Links, about 15, 20 years ago, using a dilapidated space to put together a house, to put together one of the most extraordinary early exhibitions of contemporary Indian art that we've seen, photography specifically. Yeah. So how that has changed. So ideas of relationships with government, citizenship, and then the idea of recycling. Can I ask each of you just to reflect on some of those ideas? And I think you have,
Mort, I think it's a very interesting question because in 2011, when I was building the mall, there weren't too many active public spaces in terms of museums, and especially the contemporary space. And the initial start was to look at how we can get people to engage with it. And that's when we managed to bring all the art in, and like Peter mentioned, the signages, having it in different texts and information. In fact, we have a brochure here which was designed by Shreyas Kale also, and all this really helped people to start engaging. But what's been fantastic from then till now has been the very fact that Abha has been able to bring all these various spaces, or Peter's been able to look at this public space which is now a sculpture museum, or JKK for the example. I was blown when I saw JKK, what it was and what they brought it to. It's fantastic. So while the structure has been changed and renovated and all, then what goes in it as well. And that was the combination that I've been noticing of late that's really happening. I think that's really from where I'm coming from.
Well, for me, I think the first 10 years of my practice, I stayed far away from government, and by conscious decision that I didn't want to engage with them. So my projects, whether it was Kalakoda or Elphinstone College, it was, corporate projects like Tata Palace for Deutsche Bank or HSBC, they were like regular conservation for clients who understood me, and or citizen engagement projects. And then by 2006, when the Convocation Hall of the University Library came up, it's the only Gilbert Scott building in India, for crying out loud. And I said, fine, I'm going to, for the love of the building, have to engage with the government. And that was an eye-opener, because for a simple thing like stained glass restoration or line pointing, there was no schedule of works in the government system. So for gold leaf gilding on the Convocation Hall ironwork, we actually had to do a 98-page rate analysis to explain how many gold foils, what caratage, how many times you place it, how many times you burnish it with alsi ka tel, how many times you rub it, how much man-hours that's going to take. So to explain one project, one item of conservation that's not in their books, it took us 3 months of hard labor just to explain that. And that's frustrating as hell. But then it sort of struck me that yes, I can stay away from it because it's so much easier to deal with people who understand what you're doing rather than meet a government officer who says, you're a conversation architect? What does that mean? And I said, no, I'm a conservation architect. So I think when I started out in the 90s in Bombay, people didn't know what conservation architects did. And so having said that, if you want to deal or engage with really important structures, fortunately or unfortunately, you cannot sidestep the government. If I got to work on Ajanta caves or the town hall, your client is the government, so you can't get away from it. Having said that, over the last 20 years, there's been a change in government, and sometimes it's just personal, like it's that some people in the government who do have a great broader vision. And I think that happened with Rajasthan, because the Chief Minister has a really great idea of culture. And when she told me the first time I met her, and she'd seen my projects, and she said, I have a project for you. this is the bus adda, which was Bikaner House, and she said that should become the calling card for Rajasthan. At that time, there was, when we started on the project, even within the government, there was just so much opposition that why are we moving our officers out? Why are we turning this into a public area? But now, after 2 years that Bikaner House has been functioning, there's a cafe, there's a restaurant, there's beautiful exhibitions, flamenco dances, all sorts of things, fashion shows that have happened in Bikaner House. Now, when we're working currently on the first floor renovation, you do see the government people actually more enthusiastic because you've proven to them that this model works. So I think what happens initially is this sort of defiance at any kind of change. It's the inertia of rest, I think, that happens psychologically to all of us. But when you've proven that this model works and you can make it work, and I think the key to that is sustainability, because if you spend crores on a project and then it just sits there gathering dust, and like you just mentioned, that if you don't recycle that space, you're never going to make it functional and sustainable. So why do we shy away from the fact that at the Asian Art Museum, I've attended amazing cocktails and galas, and that brings in money for the running of the museum. Or the V&A, you have three types of restaurants. So if you're a student, you buy a sandwich in the courtyard, but if you can afford it, you can have a champagne and an amazing dinner inside, and it costs a bomb. So if you can do that in England, if you can rent for an engagement party the London Bridge, if you pay top dollar, but that money goes back to making sure that it's not pan stained, the staircase is not a mess. But because in India we have this crazy idea of, oh, we are selling our souls if we do anything to culture, that we treat our heritage like Nirupama Roy of the movies of the 70s. That, she's malnourished, she's dying, she's wearing this white sari, but don't you dare give her a makeover. You respect her and you say, Ma, but you just let her rot. And that's what we do to our cultural sites.
I'm often asked, especially by people coming to India for the first time, about the contemporary art scene and all that, and you look back and you say, well, we saw a great amount of growth in terms of the serious contemporary art world of India, say from 2000 to 2010. We had a boom in the market, a boom in galleries, and then unfortunately things did sort of, in market-wise, sort of fizzle out a bit, but then luckily we saw institutions come up, such as Bauda Gilad, Kiran Nadar, now we have JKK, more things like that. So I think things are healthy. I mean, we need obviously more galleries in India. We just lost 2 very good galleries last year in Bombay. Unfortunately, we don't see more good young galleries opening in Delhi. I'm very worried that we're going to see a generation or 2 of artists literally wither on the vine, because they can't, there's nowhere for them to do their shows. I mean, I think artists have to have solo shows to develop as artists, regardless of the market, if it sells or not, even just for the feedback, I don't think art is finished until it's exhibited, and there's that feedback, and we need that. So now, going back to the citizen question, I'm going to put all the emphasis and all the blame and all the fault on the artists. Because they sit around and they moan and groan that they don't do this for me, and I'm not waiting for a gallery and all that, and I'm like, get off your butts. We've got, in Delhi, we've got Lalit Kala Academy, which is a beautifully designed gallery building that is available to artists at very, very, low cost if they're doing their own shows. Get off your butts and do it yourselves, We saw that happen with a generation of artists that started Koj. Now there's Kona, there's Clark Hustings, but we need much more of that, and I think it really has to be the artists themselves have to do it. Of course, other people that are interested in arts administration and curating as careers can tie in with that bigger picture. But I think the artists have to be much more activist, much more engaged to demand more for their institutions, to create institutions. And I think that's the real sad situation. And I'm often saying that when I have to talk to young artists. You get out there and, stop sitting around waiting for a gallery to come to give you a show, because it's not going to happen.
No, quite so.
I think just to cap that, while I agree that artists need to also come out, but you have to leave the government out. I think we can't always say that government's going to do this for us, the government's going to do this for us. I think we all have to step
The
up.
point of the citizen is to demand that their government.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know,
So we
why
have to
don't
step up.
artists? Why doesn't a group of artists go to Lalit Kala in Delhi and say, "We're not even going to pay you this fee. We're underwriting this cost. We are taxpayers. Our parents are taxpayers. Demand more from these governments."
I agree. So
Oh, but it's so lethargic. Oh, you can't do anything. Well, you have a freaking sit-in. You know.
I agree, Peter, but I think also there's a combination of the citizens who have to step up and actually go out and do things. Second is also the gallerists. I think they need to also understand that we need to work with people where, especially when it comes to public art, and you've been successfully got lots of artists and gallerists to come and work with their artists to bring that up. And I think third is what Ava mentioned. Once the structure starts looking beautiful, once you start creating good things, automatically you start creating the content behind it. Like I think for me, when I worked with my artist, with my architect Ronit, he created something which helped me bring in more stuff inside. So the exteriors are also important. So I think it's a combination of individuals, gallerists and artists all get together and actually get engagement happening.
And I think that, it's collaborations which can get very exciting. That I remember one of the first Kalagoda festivals Shirin had hosted in her gallery, collaborations between architects and artists. So there was Sen Kapadia and Rahul Mehrotra and myself collaborating with artists like Atul Dodia and Shilpa Gupta. But then if you do that in projects, like we tend to say that this is an art project and therefore an artist would handle it. This is an architecture project and therefore an architect would handle it. The beauty of Navalgarh Fort is because it brings in magic, because you're looking at a building and it's completely out of context and therefore the right context to bring in contemporary art. If you put in old folk art, it wouldn't be half as exciting. So where you have even a project which, why can't we rethink Watson's Hotel in a city like Bombay where there's millions of, we're the financial capital and there's a privately owned building which is being up for sale. It's the first cast iron building in the world which was inhabited and it's rotting away. It's not government. It just needs one entrepreneur to say, I'm going to buy it up. I'm going to turn it back into the fanciest hotel that Bombay ever saw, because this was the fanciest hotel that Bombay ever had. So we just need somebody with a vision who brings up people, and collaborations can be the most exciting.
But which is why I feel like weekends like this are actually really important. And I think that's why the art community certainly turned up for Decode, because for us to be able to talk to an audience that is not, as you say, siloed into our old cronies that we know well and we work with year in, year out, but we're able to talk to a much larger demographic of architects and designers and people who ordinarily would not be coming to see contemporary art is actually very exciting. And in fact, in the audience, I can see it's great that there is such a diverse demographic. And I think at this point, it'd be lovely if we could open it up to you, if there are any questions or reflections on any of the three presentations that you've heard. Sure, let me pass you the microphone. Maybe you'd like to tell us who you are?
I'm Manu Manshid. I'm a visual merchandiser and a space designer. I'm a stylist and I teach in many colleges. What Abha does is something really after my heart. I met you recently in Delhi, do you remember? We had this chat. Okay, congratulations to all three of you for the kind of work you've done. It's amazing. Public spaces, visual clutter, visual pollution is something really after my heart. My heart goes out when I go out and I see all these things happening. I have two questions for you, Abha. First, you said that you were always a little wary of collaborating with government. You were keeping them aside, and then you won their confidence and you're doing these projects, these amazing projects in Bombay. Has it become easier for you now? Has the government become more collaborative?
I learned to my own surprise and disappointment that there's nothing monolithic like one government. Yes. Because if I'm working on Corbusier's Capitol complex in Chandigarh, I'm dealing with Chandigarh UT administration, Punjab government, Haryana government. I'm dealing with Rajasthan government somewhere and Tamil Nadu government, and each one of them works separately and differently, and it's schizophrenic. So we have good days and bad days.
I've had to face the same. I've got some very amazing projects offered to me, but I could not do it because of red tapeism and bureaucracy and this and that. And my second question is, like you said, that you were working on the Bikaner house. And after the first phase was completed, the second phase was much easier. People were more enthusiastic. Similarly, when they see all this work that you've done in Hanuman Square and stuff, I've also done a lot of work in Bombay, but small scale. So when they see these large buildings looking great, the public reacting to it, it's right there for them to see. Can't there be laws? Can't there be norms passed that, okay, this is going to be the benchmark, this is how we're going to maintain our signages, this is how the buildings are going to be conserved? Can't they see it? It's been so many years, you're talking about fighting, you're talking about people, groups working on this. Is nobody getting awakened that, okay, this is what it says, let's pass a law?
There are lots of laws. There's a License Act in 1888 in the Bombay Municipal Corporation. The problem is not the laws, the problem is actually implementing them. And I think the whole beauty of Bombay lies in the fact that our conservation efforts have not been government reliant, like all other cities which wait for government to come in. And everything from the Kalagoda festival to initiatives like this, or or even the restoration of the Opera House.
It's the whole country.
But in terms of Bombay, I think we've pretty much managed to do things on citizen initiative. And sometimes, as Vijay said, that perhaps is the right way for us to go, because otherwise it'll just get very.
We'll be waiting always.
Yeah, we'd either be waiting or we'll be, we'd have our hands tied at the back.
Internationally, how many corporates actually support these causes? It's a lot more than the government. Eventually, if you really look at it, in the current status in India, how many corporates are actually supporting you? We're actually running after them. They should be actually wanting to do this. So I think we all have to stand up.
Peter, any input or no? I think we should probably wrap it up, because I know that you must be looking forward to your lunches. If there is any last minute, we could probably squeeze in. Otherwise, I think I'm going to thank all of you so much for coming, and please thank our wonderful panelists, Peter, Abha and Vijay. And thank you to Decode for organising this, and happy shopping. Back to you.